Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm going to tell you today about Australia in World War II. And Australia in World War II, their accomplishments and achievements are largely overlooked, but they played a key role in World War II. Okay, and Australia was in the European and the Pacific theater in World War II. Australia entered World War II in 1939. Okay, and their first assignment was in Ethiopia and East Africa, and shortly after that they moved to Libya. And Libya was under Italian control. Benito Mussolini was dictator of Italy at the time, and he allied himself with the Nazis. And the Australians' first assignment was to take the port city of Bardia. And the Australians succeeded. The battle only lasted 2 days, and 80,000 Italian soldiers surrendered to the Australians. That's how tough and efficient the Australian soldiers were in World War II. And the division that did the fighting at that battle was the Australian 6th Infantry Division. They were the first infantry division to deploy to World War II. And many of the soldiers were ideal soldiers because they grew up a tough, rugged life in the Australian mountains or the outback. Now, they did have a very, very relaxed attitude towards military discipline, and they were kind of rough around the edges and kind of very direct. But at the same time, they were very brave, very selfless, very strong, and very dedicated soldiers, which made up for that. So, and then eventually they got to where they helped the British take Benghazi from the Italians, the Libyan town of Benghazi. So that was the first thing that the Australians did. Now, shortly after the 6th Infantry Division came, the 6th Infantry Division the 6th Infantry Division, parts of the 6th Infantry Division was eventually sent to Syria, and they were sent with the 7th Australian Infantry Division, okay? They were sent with the Free French Resistance and the British Cavalry to go take some airfields that were held in Syria, and they were held by the Vichy French government. The Vichy French was not the Free French Resistance. The Free French Resistance fought with the Allies, but the Vichy French government was the French government that was Nazi puppet-like, that basically cooperated with the Nazis. And the Vichy French put up stubborn resistance, and they fought to the death, and they fought a lot harder than the Australians or the Free French or the British expected, but the Australians did take the airfields from the Vichy French. They liberated the country of Syria from fascist rule, and then they also liberated the Lebanese capital of Beirut during World War II. Yep, that's what the Australians did. And then shortly after that, and then also then the 6th Infantry Division, after that, they went to Crete and to the country of Greece, the Greek island of Crete, and also to Yugoslavia, because the Germans were planning to invade those countries along with invading the Soviet Union. So the Australians were there to put up resistance, and while the Australians lost those battles, and they lost the country of Greece and the island of Crete into German hands, as well as the country of Yugoslavia, they put up stubborn resistance. The Germans faced severe losses. Even though the Germans won the battle, the Germans faced a lot of losses. It was a lot heavier losses than they ever had before on the ground. They had a lot of air losses in the Battle of Britain, but as far as ground losses, this was some of the heaviest ground losses that the Germans had, that the Germans lost. Some of the heavier ground losses the Germans had. And so the Australian morale was not killed. They were not discouraged. They were not worn out. It actually increased Australian morale. And then shortly after that, almost all the Australians were assigned to Tobruk. That was a port in Libya. The Germans eventually helped the Italians, and they retook Libya. But the port of Tobruk was one of the few towns and port cities in Allied hands. And Tobruk was defended. And the Australians largely lived in the caves there when they were not fighting, because the Germans had a lightning surprise attack, a blitzkrieg attack, so they didn't have time a lot of times to dig trenches and to position themselves like they needed to. So when they weren't fighting, they lived in the caves. And so they proudly called themselves the Rats of Tobruk. And through intense patrolling, intense reconnaissance, the Australians stop the Nazis at Tobruk. And Corporal John Edmondson won the Victoria Cross. He died in that battle, but he held on to his machine gun bunker and his machine gun position despite being severely wounded. So God bless John Edmondson for his selflessness and bravery and dedication for doing that. Now, eventually, some of the Australian divisions got pulled back from the Middle East and got transferred to the Pacific Theater of Operations. Because, as most of you guys know, on December 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, and the Australians feared like they were next. And in 1942, the Japanese bombed the Australian port city of Darwin, and they actually used more bombs in the city of Darwin than they did on Pearl Harbor. And there were many Australians there in the Battle of Singapore, which happened in late 1941 to early 1942, and in Malaysia, and the Japanese took Singapore from the British, and there were many Australian prisoners that were taken in that battle. But many Australians escaped, as well as in Papua New Guinea, and they would escape and go fight with the Papua New Guinea guerrillas, and they would fight side by side. And that was definitely evident when the Japanese attempted to capture Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea, and that was a key port that the Japanese wanted to capture. But the first line of defense that the Australians had was a partially trained Australian militia, as well as Papua New Guinea guerrilla fighters. And while the guerrilla fighters and the militiamen were being pushed back, they were still slowing and delaying the Japanese advance until regular Australian soldiers could arrive. And the Japanese made it as far as within less than 40 miles to Port Moresby, but they never captured Port Moresby. The Japanese went down a trail called the Kokoda Trail, but the Australians suspected that, and they were there waiting for the Japanese, and the Australians denied the Japanese soldiers Port Moresby, and they fought side by side with, as I said, with guerrilla soldiers from Papua New Guinea, and the Australian soldiers and the Papua New Guinea soldiers depended on each other for survival. And they, one group had light skin, one group had dark skin. And the U.S. people from Papua New Guinea would be classified as black. But the Australian soldiers and the soldiers from Papua New Guinea did not care about that. They depended on each other for survival. They saved each other's lives. They gave each other medicine if one was sick, if one was facing dysentery. In that kind of environment, they made sure that they didn't leave each other behind. If they had to fall back or retreat in a battle, they didn't leave their fellow soldier behind. It was an example of courage, bravery, regardless of color or culture. These guys fought on the side of good, defeating fascism. And we need to note that, and we need to honor that. That's the kind of bravery that the Australian soldiers showed in World War II. There were about 60 Australian soldiers at D-Day on June 6, 1944. And also in the Battle of Britain, there were 21 Australian pilots in the Battle of Britain, and 14 of those pilots were killed in action. So God bless the brave Australian soldiers. They played key significant roles in World War II. The Battle of Tobruk really denied the German general Erwin Rommel. He really needed Tobruk to be successful in the North Africa campaign, but he never could take that city. He never could retake it. And the airfields that the Vichy French and Nazi governments had in Syria would have been able to bomb key Allied positions in North Africa had the Australians not taken those airfields from the Vichy French government. And also, even though, like I said, the Germans took the island of Crete and they took the country of Yugoslavia, the Australians gave them such heavy losses that even though the Germans won the battle, it scarred them psychologically. They realized probably the second time, the first time was the Battle of Britain, but they realized the second time that they could be defeated. So it scarred the Germans really, really badly. It scarred them psychologically. And and also with Australian prisoners of war that were in World War II, that were prisoners of war to the Japanese. There was this one prison called Sandakan Prison. Now, this was not typical of all. This was even extreme for Japanese POW camps, and a lot of those POW camps were very brutal. But this was still very extreme, even for a Japanese POW camp. That there was around 1,800, between 15 and 1,800 Australian soldiers in Sandakan Prison, and only 6 of them survived in captivity. Now, there were some that escaped and managed to fight with the guerrillas, but as far as the ones that remain in camp, of the 1,800, only 6 of them survived. And there were about 650 British prisoners, and all 650 British prisoners in Sandakan Prison passed away. Now, with that being said, I've forgiven Japan. I've seen the movie Unbroken. It's a very good book, and I highly recommend people to read it. What happened, happened. Okay, every country does things that they're not proud of. I've forgiven Japan. Japan's a key ally now. Japan has a democratic form of government. Like, sometimes people say that the Japanese government hasn't apologized enough, but if you go to Korea, a lot of the comfort women in Korea, they get apologies every year, and several apologies every year from Japanese tourists. So that says something to me right there. And Japan did apologize for the Bataan Death March, when Japan conquered the Philippines and they forced American and Filipino prisoners of war to march several hundred miles with almost no food and water, and several of them died. So they call it the Bataan Death March. Japan apologized to the United States and to the Philippines for the Bataan Death March. So, and they've invited Australian prisoners of war to Japan, and many Japanese people and some government officials actually have apologized to Australian prisoners of war. But I am saying what I just said to show the sacrifices that the Australian soldiers made in World War II. So God bless Australia. Thank you guys for what you did, and your sacrifice does not need to be in vain. Hope everybody's doing well. Take care. God bless, and bye-bye. Bye-bye.